but I do think he left the road.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't hear. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Welcome to day 11 of the search for 19-year-old Jay SLATER. In this episode, we're going to look at the last ping and also deal with the number 3 clue we all missed. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. If you find this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also join the channel. There's a join link in the description. So head there if you want to become a member. And you can also hit the thanks button and let's get started. So we're at day 11 and now is a good time to evaluate the most important question. What and where is Jay's last sign of life? Do you know off the top of your head? Now, there are two ways of dealing with the last ping. And I mean, the last ping does bring us to the number 3 clue. So we're going to get to that. But there are two ways really to deal with the last ping. The one is within the accident theory, and that's what we're going to deal with in this analysis. And the other one is within the foul play narrative, and we'll deal with that in a subsequent analysis where we'll look at the distance and time between the phone's movements, and there certainly is some cause for, I don't know if it's concern, but we need to certainly investigate that because there do seem to be some questions and issues around that. Now, the answer in terms of Jay's last sign of life, what and where is it? Well, it's the ping. Now, did you know that Jay was talking to his friend Lucy when the phone cut out? That's according to her. And that ping is the last signal, the last sign, the final digital vestige we have of the 19-year-old. Now, obviously, you can say, I don't believe Lucy, and so that isn't evidence because something happened before that. Well, that is part of the foul play narrative. In this, we are going to assume that what Lucy's saying is true and that ping is our best evidence. And that's, when one note is off, it ruins the whole symphony. So if you get some of these, if you make the wrong interpretation at a certain point, well, then that's going to take you in the wrong direction. And no wonder you're not going to be able to find Jay. So this makes it crucial evidence that the last ping, whether you accept it or not, is crucial. And further, it's absolutely central to begin the search from this point and from there radiate systematically and concentrically outwards. Now, in the Kylie Rodney case, the last ping was also the last clue of where she was and the best clue. And it actually turned out she was found a couple of meters from that last ping, but just in water. And people just dismissed the last ping as not very important. Let me say that again. She was found a few meters from the last ping. And they ended up searching everywhere except concentrating right there. Or certainly when they did search, they didn't search very carefully. Pretty incredible. So anyway, here's the question. Where did the last ping occur and was it on the road? What do you think the answer is? Where did the last ping occur? Was it on the road? Well, from what we know, the call cuts out. Jay is calling Lucy, the call cuts out, and the phone's last location isn't a road. It's a path in the rugged rural Detino National Park, popular with hikers. This is unfortunately very bad news with not terribly positive prospects for Jay because it means he's left the road. And so when Tom Beckett was interviewed by The Sun a few days ago, you heard him at the beginning of this clip. He summarized the situation perfectly saying, I do think he left the road. I think he's right, but we don't need to think because we know he did. The ping shows that he did. Now, let me put it this way. if you were an evil puppeteer and you wanted to deliberately steer Jay towards harm, you wanted to get Jay into the worst possible scenario from the Airbnb in Muscat, the Casa Abuela Tina, which is on the outskirts of Muscat, and that's also quite important, is that this Airbnb, it's not like it's in the center of Muscat, and then you have a choice of going one way or another to get out of Muscat. It's already on the outskirts, actually on the outside of Muscat, which is already in a way influencing the direction that Jay is going to take, because he thinks, well, I'm not going to go back to Muscat, I'm going to go away to get to my destination. What he didn't realize was his destination was actually on the other side of Muscat, which meant he would need to go back through Muscat and then further south to get to his destination, Los Cristianos, right? And so that is really part of what I think confused him. And you get a sense of that by going onto Google Maps and just sort of wandering around the area, and you really do get a sense of what is going on, what he was dealing with. Now, let's accept that he doesn't have water or battery power, neither of which would be a big schmooze if he got onto a bus and ended up back at his hotel 40 or so minutes later. And bear in mind, that is how he is imagining his day to begin with. I'm heading to my hotel. I'll probably be there in a couple of minutes. I am a bit thirsty. My phone's not very charged, but after about 40 minutes, I'll be home. And probably Jay figured his hotel was just a short walk towards the peninsula in front of him and likely downhill all the way. Another thing that he may have considered is hitchhiking. And he may have thought, well, I'll walk, I'm not going to wait for the bus. Maybe a tourist will pick me up. And that's certainly not only possible, but that also opens the door to a possible foul play thing where somebody picked him up. He was hitchhiking and someone picked him up and then things went to pot. Now, again, if you were an evil puppeteer and you wanted to deliberately steer Jay into the worst possible scenario, to get him into the worst possible pickle, that's in terms of getting him away from the Airbnb in Muscat and into danger as soon as possible, here's what you'd need to do.
It wasn't hard.
It's not hard to do. Number one, somehow convince Jay not to wait for the bus. Then, number two, lead him out of town, heading north instead of south. And finally, number three, at this point, have him go off the road. I'm just saying, if you wanted to deliberately get him into trouble, then those would be the three conditions, and that seems like that's exactly what did happen. Did Jay not wait for the bus because he was under some kind of duress from a person? Was he more under kind of situational duress? He was tired. If you've been up all night, waiting another 2 hours somewhere, just sitting there waiting somewhere, that is going to feel like kind of a big deal. And so that's the first mistake. He decides not to wait for the bus. Then he starts walking out of town, which is not the end of the world, but he ends up walking the wrong way. And what is in front of him is basically a national park. There's no infrastructure there. There are not even roads beyond a certain point. And that's then brings you to the worst possible thing. He then goes off the road. And what can happen off the road where you have steep cliffs and they're extremely rugged and there are not a lot of people around, and as soon as you go off the road, well, now your odds of encountering somebody else diminish rapidly. Now, this simple orienting mistake, and by the way, a simple orienting mistake is how hikers find themselves in serious dwang. I mean, taking the wrong path, taking the wrong turn. That's how everything goes wrong. I mean, going north instead of south literally leads Jay into the Dragon's Maw, because the wrong turn means he ends up in a park. He ends up going where there's nothing, compared to if he'd just gone the other direction, he would have gone more and more towards infrastructure and other people who could have assisted him. Now, the park we're talking about is the Parque Rural de Teno, and as I said, this is the worst possible scenario, because the further he goes, now bear in mind he's going in the wrong direction, but the further he goes, the worse it gets because he's going the wrong way. Every step he takes, he needs to basically undo, he needs to come back. So every step he takes, he's kind of doubling the amount of effort it's going to take to just get back to where he needs to be. And the longer he persists in going in one direction, again the wrong way, the longer he's going to be out there, which he can't afford to be, and further it's going to be tough to come back, right? Another thing is, crucially, if he leaves the path and heads downhill, and in his mind he may have thought, okay, well, I'm not that far from where I need to be. Where I need to be is kind of by the coast, and I don't really need to be on this road. I just need to kind of get down there. Well, then every footfall he takes downhill will have to be retraced uphill when he realizes he's gone the wrong way, except it's going to be twice as hard, and assuming that he even realizes his mistake, he's going to be twice as thirsty on the way back. Okay, so what is the number 3 clue we all missed? Now, I am going to get to it, but let's briefly review clues 1 and 2. And I get it if you say, I don't understand. Age isn't a big deal, but that's within the foul play narrative. Within the accident narrative, age is absolutely central. If you're a proponent of the foul play theory, age probably wouldn't really be relevant. Maybe if he hitchhiked, you could say that younger people tend to hitchhike. But in an outdoor accident exposure scenario, age and naivete is absolutely relevant. You might say, yeah, but not really. Let's compare Jay again to David Larkin. Now, I hope you watched that video that everyone got their knickers in a twist about this missing Brit found. I hope you've watched it, because that is about an experienced British hiker whose searchers in the area felt they had to rescue. Now, how is David different to Jay? And why would Larkin not need to be rescued, as he claimed in subsequent interviews? Well, at 51 years old, Larkin is twice Jay's age. Does that have anything to do with it? He doesn't need to be rescued because he's older. Well, what comes with being older? Experience. Larkin went to that area to hike, and what is very explicit about it is the area where Jay went missing is an area frequented by hikers, pretty much nobody else, just hikers. And thus, he was prepared in terms of gear, clothing, and supplies. And you kind of need fairly specialized gear for that kind of environment. The right shoes, the right weatherproofing, right? All that kind of thing. And we know that Jay didn't go to the area to hike. It was probably the last thing on his mind after partying all night. Probably he was tired and in need of some shut-eye. And so this is another difference, which has a little to do with age as well. Larkin in his 50s, he's kind of past his sell-by date, as many of us are, for raves and discos and partying. And so hiking is more his cup of tea. As a result, he probably makes sure he does what most seasoned hikers do. He makes things as comfortable as possible. He gets enough sleep. He's got the right clothing. He has enough to eat. None of this applies to Jay. He doesn't have the right clothing. He's wearing a T-shirt, I think a white T-shirt. His footwear is probably not appropriate really either. Jay's also sleep-deprived, hungry and thirsty, even slightly injured, and perhaps hungover or even high. And all of these are related to his age and maturity. That brings us to the number 2 clue, remote. Now, again, you might say it's not really a big clue. We know it was remote. Do you appreciate what this terrain is like? And now we're going to spend a bit of time getting to know this idea in a bit more detail. The area Jay was moving through is popular with hikers like Larkin, which is fine for hiking. But if non-hikers wander into this area, as Jay apparently did, then he's just entered a fabric that has no infrastructure, no roads, no cafes, no signal. And as soon as you do that, you actually need to take things with you far more than you would in, say, a city where food is readily available, cash machines are readily available, cell phone signals are readily available, people to give you directions are readily available. Well, none of that is in this situation. And so no infrastructure is the opposite of what Jay was looking for. Jay was in this little village and he was trying to get back to infrastructure, his hotel, right? Now, besides all this, the central difference between Larkin and Jay was that Larkin knows the terrain. And again, you might say, well, it's just mountains. But he likely had maps with him, whereas Jay didn't. And that is a very big aspect to this. That is how you get lost, because you don't have a map, you don't have a cell phone signal, and that's how you get lost. Also, it's a very disorienting landscape. There's just mountains everywhere. Now, it's okay to get lost in a vehicle in a populated area. You just drive yourself out. It's totally different to be lost on foot in a remote, empty area, and Jay was in one of the remotest places it was possible to be in Tenerife. And now may be a good time to shift our perspective a notch about our notion of remote. How remote are we talking about? I mean, let's just go into it. Let's stew in this whole thing a little bit more. And before you stop listening, I found this really fascinating. I learned a couple of things. Did you know that the mountain in Tenerife, in the Teide National Park, that's sort of close to the center of the island, it's the highest elevation in Spain. It's also the third largest volcano in the world when measured from its base, right? It's also the highest mountain in all of the Atlantic islands. So, this is a pretty impressive landscape, pretty unusual landscape as well.
Are we learning yet?
Do you see just how extreme this landscape is? Now, I'm not sure rugged terrain is the best place to go kidnap someone, but that's me. Now, according to Lonely Planet, when Plato, this is quoting from Lonely Planet, when Plato mistook the Canary Islands for Atlantis, it must have been because of places like Punta de Tino, and that's basically the area that we're dealing with right now. Lonely Planet goes on to say, this beautiful spot jutting into the Atlantic and the most northwestern point on Tenerife is no secret. Once considered the edge of the world, the Canary Islands stood where the old map ended before European explorers discovered civilization. Venture beyond the crowded beach resorts in the south and the island's famous water park or the well-trodden hikes and trails to find a hidden Tenerife filled with secluded spots. What does secluded spots mean? It's empty places. The south coast beaches like Playa de las Americas and Los Cristianos, that's the area that he was sort of based in, thrum with beachgoers, but those in the know go north for a slice of proper coastal wilderness and fewer crowds. Some of the best northern beaches are terrifically secluded, so much so that you can only reach them on foot or by boat, and he's wandering, almost like he's sleepwalking into this area, this terrifically secluded area. It goes on to say, waves crash against a black volcanic beach, solitary mountains rise like giants in the background, and there are some to die for sunsets. Pretty poor choice of words for what we're talking about here, but that brings us at last to clue number 3. Are you ready? Rain. Rain. The number 3 clue we all missed is rain. Now, like the other two, age and remoteness neither seem like much of a big deal. But when dealing with this kind of landscape, this type of extremely rugged terrain, steep terrain, and a certain kind of rock that weathers in a certain way, it's hugely significant. Rain on this kind of landscape and kind of almost on any mountain is hugely significant. Why? Because you can slip. Because it's slippery. And so look at what we're dealing with. Age, which is related also to experience, the remoteness of the area, and rain. All of these now become hugely significant. Now, according to Lonely Planet, they say, think twice about heading out here, in other words, to the northwest, especially if there have been heavy rains, as mud and rock slides are common. Now, it turns out Lonely Planet are right. If you do a little bit of searching and researching, unstable rocks and strata on these sheer cliffs is a real problem in Tenerife. But it's particularly serious after rain. There are all sorts of stabilization efforts trying to make the unsafe areas safe. And it's taken months for them to try and achieve stability in terms of rock falls and all of this kind of thing. Now, it didn't rain on the day Jay disappeared, and it certainly didn't rain heavily when it did rain. It did rain twice the day before, kind of a light drizzle. So again, not hard, but perhaps sufficient when combined with extremely high humidity. And the humidity was extremely high the day before, 100% for several hours, to make the footing underfoot slick, damp, and slippery, especially quite early in the morning. And that's quite important to observe, is that he does go out quite early. That's why he also misses the bus, because it's quite early. And so according to Tenerife weather, another idiosyncrasy of the island is that the north is greener, but more pertinently, more humid than the south. Why? Well, it's due to the influence of the local winds known as lower trade winds. These are cool winds. That's also going to affect things like exposure. Cool winds that bring a significant amount of moisture with them. And so what do these cool winds in the morning do to rock and steep rock and mountains? Well, combined with rain and high humidity, you have dew in the morning, which would have made any attempt to leave the road onto that already steep and very treacherous terrain even more tricky and slippy. Does that make sense? Are you feeling like it's starting to crystallize in a certain way? Now, in the next analysis, we'll look at Jay's friends joining the search and their impressions of the area, and then we will move over to dealing with the ping within a foul play scenario. Why has the phone moved in the way that it has? Okay, thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.